Dr. Mailafia, Obadiah Mailafia is joining me right now via Zoom. Doctor, are you there?
Yes, I am. Good morning, Nancy.
Good morning, Dr. Mailafia. Can I see Dr. Mailafia, please? Director. Good.
How are you doing?
I'm well,
Great
Doctor.
nation, good people. You're looking great, Nancy. Chineke. Well done. Well done.
Thank you
Your
very
husband
much.
must be doing a good job of looking after you.
Oh, yes, I must say that. Mr. Nnaji is doing his bit. Thank you very much.
Done.
Thank you very much,
Yeah.
Doctor, for joining us. It's been quite a while. I hope you've been well.
Yes, I'm trying. I'm doing my best. Thank goodness.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Now, let's get started. How worried are you with Nigeria's rising debt profile? Let me start from that basics.
Well, we have to be worried, in the sense that for two reasons. The magnitude of it, we're talking today about 33 trillion naira, which is about 86 billion US dollars. So it has risen astronomically over the last 5 years. And that is not the only problem. The problem also is the debt to GDP ratio, which went from as low as about 16 billion in 16% in 2014 to now about, we are talking about 35% of ratio. That is quite high. I know that the federal government has recently extended the upper limit of the debt to GDP ratio to about 40%, on the argument that we are still within a safe zone compared to advanced countries. The US is about 100% of GDP. Other countries like Italy and Japan are more like 120% of GDP. The third element, of course, is the amount of money that is used to service the debt. That amount has increased dramatically. Today, we are using close to, last year we used actually 92% of all government revenues just to service our debt, 92%. Now, on average, we are talking about 80 to 86% that is being used to service the debt. So obviously, it is a matter of very grave concern. Well, in the practical world, you don't use GDP to service your debt. You use raw cash to service your debt. You use revenue. And in a time of dwindling revenues, it is a major concern, definitely, because we needed to boost the revenue and use most of it, for poverty alleviation, for building up our infrastructures. Now, if we're having to use most of it just to service our debt, then we ought to be very concerned.
Doctor, I like the fact that you brought in other countries, because I remember some time ago, some years ago now, perhaps about 7 or 8 years ago, when we went for the World Bank IMF annual summit in Washington. And, the finance minister at that time was like, okay, fine. These issues also came up. And we asked the questions then, Nigeria's debt to GDP ratio. And about that time, we were about 16, 17%. And, we were told that the threshold, at least for us then, was 40%. When I took a look at Nigeria's GDP to debt ratio, where we are right now is at 35%. So you're right, bringing that perspective in. For the United States, I think the United States is 108% debt to GDP ratio. Japan is about 266%. Italy is about 156%. Where I'm going to actually is that, should we compare ourselves to those kind of people? Should we compare ourselves to the United States, for example? where debt to GDP is 108%, and the United States has the luxury of having the world's reserve currency, has the luxury of giving dollars to the rest of the world and not even really getting, we are the ones chasing their dollars. So should we really compare ourselves to those kind of people? But let me also put a caveat here. The South Africa is 83%, because some people may say, okay, those are Western countries. South Africa's debt to GDP ratio is 83%. Ghana's debt to GDP ratio is 62%. So Nigeria is hovering around 35%. Are we still safe?
I don't think so, and we shouldn't be comparing ourselves with anybody. It reminds me of, you remember your primary school days, where you have this big fat bully, and during break time, this bully has been pestering the daylights out of everybody, and then they urge you are very small and skinny, and they urge you to go and find the bully, and they keep urging you to just go into the ring. You can do it, you can do it, and then foolishly, without actually estimating what is needed, you just go in and the bullet knocks you down. And this
Prof,
is
Doctor, you know why I'm laughing? Because that exactly happened to me some time ago when I was in secondary school. I remember that event very vividly. There was a young classmate of mine that used to bully everyone, and I couldn't take it anymore one of those days. So you can imagine how I was there. I was very skinny and very tiny. But I beat the daylight of that lady. I don't want to mention her name. And the bullying stopped.
I did a little way. You were very skinny, Nancy.
Yes.
Skinny.
So you can imagine how I was in secondary school, very tiny, and
I'm saying, okay, Nancy, you could knock out the bully, but to be honest, I don't think Nigeria is in a position to knock down any bully. We can't even knock down Boko Haram, not to talk of, knock down. What I'm trying to say is that beware of international agencies and others who are telling them, no, you are fine, just go in and do it. Oh, you are still within the acceptable threshold. It is the person that wears the shoes that knows where it pinches. Number one, never compare yourself with America. America are the world reserve central bank, in a manner of speaking, because the US dollar is the world reserve currency. If they so wished, they could just print dollars and pay off
which they've been doing.
Yes, the world will not come to an end, right? But Nigeria cannot do the same thing. Our dollar used to be respected, not anymore. Nobody would touch it with a barge pole, not even our neighbors in Cameroon and Cotonou and the rest of it. So we've got to be careful. The third factor, obviously, is we are still a monocultural, dependent rentier economy. We're living off rent collected from multinational oil companies, with all the vicissitudes of the global price of oil, which, as you know, has been disastrous over the last 2 years. It's only now coming up again. But we have to be very careful, because you never know the future of oil. And if this thing comes down precipitously to the level where it is just at cost production, and the oil companies keep increasing what they regard as the cost of production, then we are in serious difficulty. So we've got to watch it. I'm not an alarmist. I like to see myself as a cool and calculated development finance expert. So, but we have to be very careful, most especially where these loans are going into. The bulk of the foreign loans are actually commercial loans that we have collected on the commercial market to be paid back at commercial rates. So we have to be very careful. Make sure that those loans are used for projects that have a guaranteed rate of return on investments. That is the way to go. And we should plug all the loopholes for hemorrhage. There's a lot of waste, there's a lot of financial hemorrhage in the system. And you have to plug those loopholes. I wish we could learn a bit from Tanzania under the late President Magufuli. He reached a point where he really didn't need to borrow. He was shocked to realize that you could save a lot by just cutting out waste and plugging all the loopholes that encourage, rent-seeking, corruption, and hemorrhage in the financial system. Once you could do that, you would discover how much money you could save in order to finance a lot of projects. And left to me, we must never borrow for social programs.
Okay.
I don't see the point of it. You borrow to give ability, for social programs. This is very dangerous. Borrow only for projects like power, electricity, infrastructures.
But that is what the government will say that they are borrowing for, because I'm now going to read from the DM, or the Debt Management Office, because we know at the time this rising debt profile is still a subject of discussion, and talking about Chinese loans that Nigeria has gotten. The DMO says that as these loans are project tied. The project's 11 in number. I'm talking about the loans from China, which is about $3.12 billion that we have borrowed from China. I needed to put that fact right, because you also see a lot of people going on social media and saying some things that are not fact-backed. But I just had to bring that in because of what you said in terms of the loans that Nigeria is borrowing should be project tied, shouldn't be for consumption, shouldn't be for paying salaries. That's one. The second thing, Doctor, is that for those of you that are economists, development finance experts and all of that, this idea of borrowing, is it really a bad thing? Is debt bad, or is more debt bad? I read a book years ago, if I can remember the name of the author. The book is called Between Debt and the Devil, and the Turner, if I can remember his name. And he did liken debt to acquiring more debt, to like, an environmental pollution, in terms of you begin an environmental pollution to the economy. Do you share that? And how much debt is bad? Is debt bad at all? Is debt bad? If debt is not bad, is more debt bad? Since it's something that came from you people.
And you too, Nancy, we're all in this together. We're all in this together. Now, you are, it's a legitimate question, because debt is a reality of life, it's a fact of life. It has been said that the smartest business people don't use their own money. They use other people's money to build wealth. They use money from the banks, they use money from the Eurobond markets and others to build up their businesses. It is very unwise to just use your savings alone to build up a business. That's what, is the standard wisdom. So I cannot sit here and say, don't borrow at all. I cannot say that. But we have to be very, very careful. Every country is different. Every country has its own trajectory, its unique economic, social, and political conditions. And if you like, its political economy and its trajectory. So you look at your unique circumstances as a country, and you borrow on that basis, but keep the borrowing to a minimum. Now we are talking as if we've not been here before. Don't forget that it was only in 2006 that we paid off our debt and settled our problems, obligations with the Paris Club of creditor nations. And it was very, very, very tough. I was part of that process. It was extremely tough. I was acting for the governor at that time, and I actually signed the first check of the tranches of payments that were up to 20 billion that we eventually settled. And they forgave us, I think, the 16 billion or so. And we now settled our debt of 36 billion. And I remember signing that check of 7.6 billion, the first in the tranche. I can tell you, Nancy, I think I've said it before, that I actually caught fever. It wasn't 7 billion naira. Even if it's 7 billion naira, it's a lot of money. It was $7.6 billion.
That's a lot of money.
I just felt, goodness me. a poor country like us having to pay these rich beggars, excuse my language, pay them so much money. In fact, I caught fever. But we had to bite the bullet. We had to bite the bullet. And even then, they gave us conditions that we've forgotten. Number one, they said they will never forgive us debts ever again. Number two, they literally coerced us to set up an MDG's office and commit to provide a substantial part of our annual budget to poverty alleviation. Nothing wrong with that on the face of it, except you and I know that when people talk about poverty alleviation, you know it's an area where a lot of shenanigans can happen, where you don't have to account for. I mean, when before an election you carry money and envelopes and you are giving market women in Wuse Market and other places, Garki Market and Alaba Market, without records or anything, what does that tell you? They can only be deceiving themselves. So to me, it is an irresponsible way of managing public finances. There must be a better way.
How do we repay our debts, Doctor? How do we repay? How do we repay these debts that are accumulated? Because we are even doing that with our yearly debt servicing, a part of debt servicing every year.
Look, you mentioned, I will come to that. You mentioned that, yes, it is being allocated to infrastructures. I agree with that.
According to what the government is telling us.
On paper, it is. But I give you only one example. The Mambila Hydro Project. I think we have committed over 2 or 3 billion. I don't know the exact figure. But I'm told that till today, not a cement, not one concrete, has been laid down there. Not one. So what is happening to that money? Yes, it is allocated for power, but there is nothing to show for it. I find it very dangerous. And of course, I don't want to be very political. When you are building railways with our borrowed money to Niger, to Maradi, I have nothing against Niger. I go to Niger often. I have friends there. It's a lovely neighboring country. But you cannot borrow money in the name of Nigerians and build a railway to another man's country. It is iniquitous and it is very wrong. It is very, very wrong, especially that our children and grandchildren will be the ones to pay that money. You can't do it.
You just brought me to the next question, which is debt being a tax on our youth. How do young people begin to pay this back? Because there was a time on the program that I talked about this too, and we tried to do an analysis. In fact, the simple mathematics, and my figures came out that every Nigerian, talking about debt to GDP per capita now, every Nigerian owes, with the number, with the amount, every Nigerian owes close to 150,000, if I'm not mistaken, 152,000 naira. That's what you owe. So all those stories and English we are speaking, you may say it doesn't concern you. It concerns because I'm owing, you are owing literally.
Exactly.
So
yes.
What are the implications of this debt, which is a tax, as it were? It could be an indirect, so I don't know what the tax professionals will call it. The implications on future generations.
Well, the implications are very straightforward. You also asked me how I'm going to pay back this debt. It's all part of it. Public finance is very straightforward. You can't have butter as well as buildings. You have to make choices. And, the money that could have been used for human capital, for education, for health, a lot of that will now be channeled into paying back the loans. They have to be paid back. And bearing in mind that we've already been warned as far back as 2006 that there will be no more debt relief for Nigeria. It was part of the agreement that we signed. Now, not only that, part of the implication is the collateral. I'm told that a lot of these contracts are signed in the Chinese language. So I do not know whether our authorities fully understand everything that they sign up to, especially if it is in Chinese language. And it's been said that we've pledged even our sovereignty. That debate came up with the Honorable Amechi, the governor, the Minister for Transport, and he said, "Oh, no. What is wrong with in pledging your sovereignty? What's wrong with that? Everything is wrong with that. Your sovereignty is the only thing you have as a country, and if you pledge your sovereignty, you mean that you will be enslaved if you don't pay back. If you have a backlog of even $1, the debtor is empowered to make a call on your assets. So the implications are not very good. I'm not saying don't borrow at all, but please, when you borrow, think very deeply about it and make sure that every single dollar counts. You borrow in a justified level and you use that money only for projects that have a calculated return on investment. And I would also say that in all future authorizations by the National Assembly, you said there are projects. In fact, they are more like programs. I've read some of the documents. There's no specific project. They're more like general programs. Okay, infrastructure and this and that and power, they're general. They should go down to nitty-gritty of specifics. It will be used to build a hydro dam here. This is how much it will cost. This is how much is required. These are the counterpart funds. We should also explain why we need it in foreign currency. If it can be financed only in domestic currency, let us do it. Let us borrow in foreign currency only for projects that require that.
Okay. Doctor, last question. What is the alternative to debt? If we say we should not borrow, what's the alternative to debt? Because capitalism has come up with a concept that debt is good, but what is the alternative if we do not borrow at this time?
One of the greatest teachers that he gave me a seminar called Franco Modigliani, Nobel Prize winner in economics. And they came up with this idea that, it doesn't matter whether you finance a project by debt or by equity, it does not really matter. But mathematically, yes, you can show that it doesn't matter. But in the real world, it actually matters. It actually matters, especially if you look at the terms and conditions and the risks. It really does matter, the extent of your loans. So yes, capitalism would say there is nothing wrong with it, but I'll tell you, there are countries that have almost zero debt, and they are very healthy countries. Singapore, Norway.
The Scandinavian countries, yeah.
Qatar, they live within their means. They cut their coat according to their size, and to me, that is wisdom. And I can tell you, for countries like ours, who just came out of long years, centuries of slavery, of colonialism, and of neo-colonialism, we have to be very careful. We must guard our liberties very jealously. World powers can use debt, can use anything to recolonize us. China is recolonizing Africa just through the debt process. So we have to be careful. It is not just capitalism. It is high stakes global geopolitics. So we must have the wisdom to understand these things. It is very crucial.
Thank you very much, Doctor. Thanks for shedding your own perspective on this topical issue. Is always is an emotive issue, because if I'm here,
it shouldn't be. It's practical. It's very practical. It's how in fact, the science of economics is called economikos in the Greek language, and it started with the way a woman manages her household. Among the Greeks, all the business of the house is managed by the woman.
Yeah.
She keeps the budget. She decides what she can borrow. If there's no food in the house, she goes to the bank and borrow money at 33% interest just to buy food. then that
So you
woman
can
will-
imagine what happened to the Greek economy just a few years ago. You remember the debt to
Exactly.
GDP ratio was so high, and IMF came to and
Extraordinary.
gave them a lot of
Exactly.
conditions.
So yeah, it can be emotional, but we shouldn't get emotional. We must keep our balance. We must keep our sense of focus and national purpose and a sense of responsibility for governance in a way that expands the welfare of our people and secures our freedom and our independence and honor as a country.
Thank you very much, Doctor. It's been nice
Thank you.
seeing you again. Thank you.
Lovely to see you, Nancy. Have a wonderful day.
You too.